Well, hello there, how is everyone? I hope you're all well. You're amazing. You are amazing. I can't believe there's people who don't actually like it when I tell you guys that you are amazing. I've got a message for them people. Bollocks. Anyway, we're going to get straight into the meat and potatoes, as this is video 2 of 2 today. Now I'm guessing you may have missed video 1 because I did it early. I was up at the crack of dawn baby, because Bryan Kohberger's auntie had spoken out. And do you know what? If you're in this case, you're in it for the long haul, and you've got one eye on the media. You've got one eye constantly looking at what could potentially come out. And like I say, so the video this morning, I felt I needed to get it out there. But I noticed that a lot of you guys were asleep. You was laying in your beds, all wrapped up, nice and cosy and warm, while I was not. I was working. But anyway, yeah, so Bryan Kohberger's aunt has spoken out. She's done an interview, and there was elements of that interview that gave us a bit of an insight into things, and I could take positives from it. The overall feeling of it was that the media did what they do best, and that was do a complete and a hatchet job and make it look as bad as they possibly could. And like I say, they do a good job at doing things like that. But I have a question, and maybe you guys have got the same question, and it is this. What in the blue fuck happened to this guy? If we are led to believe that Bryan Kohberger is the person who did this crime, and look, we talk about motive, we spoke about it the other day, and people quite rightly said you don't need a motive to convict, and I get it, but you need a motive for a crime to exist. You know, something has to happen for somebody to do this crime, and this video is kind of echoing the sentiments of my previous video on this subject, but with a little bit more, I guess, information to back up my thoughts and feelings. And that is that Bryan Kohberger's aunt has come forward and said, look, Bryan, I never saw Bryan as someone who had a violent bone in his body. He was a guy who was always humble. And there was contradictory statements, because on one hand she would talk about the fact that Bryan Kohberger had a great life, a great sort of upbringing, and his parents were fantastic people. But then on the flip side of that, she would turn around and say that during a time when she would fly the family over to Las Vegas, they were obviously going through difficulties. And she would allude to the fact that Bryan himself was on medication, seemingly for depression. She said that she doesn't know the accuracy in that, so I don't know why the fuck she said it in the first place, but she said it, and she said it to the media of all people, who have gone like a dog with a bone. But look, we're looking at a guy who potentially suffered from depression. There was things going on at home, maybe, I don't know, I can only guess. Maybe Bryan was a little bit upset that his sister was this actress, or just that he had 3 sisters, and sisters are fucking annoying. But again, who knows? Families have issues. Families all have issues, and that's just part and parcel of being a family. We have issues. We still have issues. There's people in this family I would like to strangle. But we get on with it. We get on with it. And I'm sure you're in the same position. Just because people are your blood, it doesn't mean that you are friends. Anyway, I digress. I'll start feeling myself getting a little bit warm, getting a little bit fucking feisty. But, so Bryan Kohberger's aunt has spoken out, and she said the things that she said. But how can a guy go from this guy who, by his aunt's own statement, didn't have a violent bone in his body, you know, humble. And we've seen that. I've seen that. In the interactions that we have seen of Bryan, he does come across as humble. I couldn't quite put my finger on it before. When we heard his interaction with the police officer with the ticket, even though he stood his ground and was inquisitive, he was humble. We see him speaking to Ann Taylor, you know, the interaction between the two, the way he enters the courtroom, the way he sits there and he answers the question with which he answers, and he is clearly listening to his legal team. He's listening to Anne, and he is behaving in a way that shows you that he trusts in Anne, and he's doing what he's being told to do. And like I say, he does come across as quite a humble individual. But it doesn't take away the fact that he is being accused of this crime. And somebody committed it. At the end of the day, someone did this crime. And even for those of us who turn around and say that Bryan is innocent until proven guilty, it does mean that in the event that Bryan Kohberger is innocent of the crime, somebody else is guilty of the crime. And then you have to start then looking at, well, who's guilty if Bryan Kohberger isn't? So if we just go by the fact that Bryan Kohberger is the person who did the crime, he potentially did it, I still want to know why. I still want to know what happened to this guy. With a background that seemingly didn't stand out. He had seemingly the same issues as many, many families. And a humble guy. Someone who, again, not a violent bone in his body. And his aunt turns around, she makes a statement. And she says about medication, and she says, I know that if people aren't sort of in control of their medication, they can just snap. And maybe that's what happened. And I think to myself, but this crime wasn't a just snapped crime. This is a crime where someone had done their homework. They knew about the house, they knew about the movements of the house, and like we spoke on yesterday, they seemingly had a degree of skill. This isn't somebody who was a timid, who was a shy, is a borderline Asperger's kind of mentality. And again, I'm not saying he has Asperger's, I'm just saying that he seems to come across of somebody who has something underlying. Again, his auntie spoke about a trip that they took to Las Vegas, and she wanted to take them to, and see the sights of Vegas. And Bryan didn't. He stayed at home, and she thought that odd. Now, I will tell you now, one of our children, the older of the girls, suffers from social anxiety. She finds it incredibly difficult to get on a bus, and we cannot get her on a plane. When we go overseas, she can't come because she can't get on an aeroplane. She can't cope with it. There's other things that she can do fantastically. She goes to college, she interacts. She went to a college in one of the big cities nearby. And, there are other options that would have been easier options, but because of what she wanted to do, she went to a more difficult one. But, again, it comes with its struggles, and she suffers massively with, again, social anxiety. So perhaps Bryan suffers from a degree of social anxiety, but does someone with social anxiety come across as equally somebody who could enter a home not knowing who's in there, a party house at that, could have walked in there and been faced with 20 people and do this crime? Or is he someone who could have done the reconnaissance needed, the background needed, to hunt, to go in? I just can't, for the life of me, I cannot see Bryan being the person who did it. And look, I get it. I get the fact that it can be a curveball, and I get that there's evidence that doesn't look great. Now, I will say that that such a frustrating thing is that there are still people out there who feel that there's phone pings that put him in the area, and that is not a fact. There isn't phone pings that put him in the area. There are phone masts that seemingly shows that he was off the system, not picking up a signal between the time that they believed the crime took place. There is no pings that place him anywhere. There's pings that actually place him away from the area. And these masts are masts that have a 27 square mile radius. So he could have been anywhere. He could have been at home and it would have still pinged there. In fact, law enforcement themselves said that his phone pinged on a tower in Moscow, Idaho, the day after the murders, and they don't believe that he was there. Anyway, and we have a car. The car, we don't know if it's his car. It's a car that seemingly looks like his car, but it could be somebody else's car. It could have been. There's multiple cameras, multiple cars, and they could have been different cars on different cameras. Who fucking knows? The only real thing that there is in this crime is a knife sheath. And that knife sheath could have the DNA on it quite simply because he handled it at some point. Would Bryan Kohberger have handled that knife sheath if he knew that he was obtaining it in order to do a murder would he have not handled that with gloves when we're led to believe that he handled everything else with gloves? Why did this one thing that would be the sheath that holds the weapon that would do the crime, which would then lead you to believe that at the same time as handling the sheath, he would have been handling the weapon, because imagine, button snap, off, weapon out. So he's apparently handling the very fucking implement that he's going to use to do the crime, we're led to believe, without wearing gloves. That makes no fucking sense to me. No sense whatsoever. But if it's him, what went wrong? Please tell me, what went wrong to this guy who seemingly had fought through the struggles with which he had, bullying, and he'd changed his life. He'd turned his life around. He'd got away from that shit. He'd got into education and was working towards potentially a 6-figure plus salary. To throw the whole fucking lot away. For what purpose? What reason? And look, I get it. Sometimes things just happen. But no motive, seemingly no connection, apart from this knife sheath, that again can be easily explained away, and itself comes with huge questions. It makes more sense that at some point he handled it without nefarious intent, and perhaps sold it, got rid of it, I don't know. Give it to someone, lent it to someone. Or perhaps handled it because someone else was showing him it. And he touched it. Give him it back. All these things are possible. And in the Jill Dando case, we saw how these kind of forensic elements of cases can provide inaccurate evidence that can lead to a conviction that can ruin someone's life and later on be found to be wrong. But let me know down below, what do you think went wrong? Can you genuinely look at Bryan Kohberger, take all the shit out of the way, take all the things that you've heard from the likes of News Nation about the fact that they say that he went and broke into some colleague's house and installed cameras and all this bullshit. You know, I said yesterday about the fact that he had been involved in saving the life of a colleague back in 2018, and hardly any of you people knew about it. And do you know why? Because nobody reports it. That segment was contained in a video that was around 9 minutes long. 9 minutes long, which was a barrage of abuse towards this guy, Bryan Kohberger. And do you know how long that segment of that video was? To talk about him potentially being involved in saving someone's life, a female's life. 11 seconds. 11 seconds. And even when I comment that and someone queries it, someone else comes along and they say, well, I don't really think he was involved in saving the life. He just went and got the defibrillator, and I think he took a long time doing it as well. And you think, he can't even fucking have that without someone putting the boot in. Do you know what I mean? And things like this will make a difference. Say he's convicted, and say he's fucking innocent, but he's convicted, and then he has to go down the death penalty thing. Because obviously there's two trials. Your main trial, then you've got your death penalty trial. Things like this, things that show empathy towards others and the fact that he was involved in saving someone's life, could save his life. And just say he's innocent, and that saves his life. And then later on down the line, new evidence comes to light and he is exonerated. Flip side of the coin, stuff like that gets buried, he loses his life, and then later on down the line it turns out he didn't do it. Things like that happen. How would you feel about it? Catch you all in the next one.